My name's Caitlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a regional program coordinator for NAMI, South Carolina.
And then Daisy.
My name is Daisy. My pronouns are she, they, and I am an artist.
Okay. And then I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank our viewers for coming to watch us and learn a little bit about how we can support Black survivors. And I want to thank our panelists for being able to join us today. This afternoon, we got people from different time zones, so that's really cool. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Tina. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And I am the multicultural advocate and outreach specialist here at RCC. And we are a sexual violence resource center. RCC is dedicated to providing trauma-informed, survivor-centered advocacy and support. Our team of advocates are committed to empowering survivors and ensuring that we provide wraparound services that address all needs, as well as the societal factors that contribute to inequitable outcomes. We have a 24-hour helpline, free therapy service, a support group, and survivor-centered case management services. So if you find yourself ever in need, you can always hit up our helpline, which is found on our website. And you'll talk directly to an advocate who will be able to support you and connect you to more services if they see that you need to do that. So yes, thank you everyone for joining us. This is going to be super laid back. We'll get right into the questions, but it'd be super conversational and no pressure for our panelists to answer questions right or wrong. Yeah, so the first question that I have down is, how do you think your intersectional identities limited your access to care and resources? So this is after trauma happened, and you need help, right? You need some type of resource, kind of like RCC. How do you think that your identity limited the access that you had to those resources?
I feel like it was difficult for me just because I didn't know what to do. Like it wasn't really talked about, like resources. That's something you have to like physically go on your own to look into, and I had no idea where to start, who to go to, who would listen to me. And I think that that is a part of that stems from that there weren't any conversations about abuse or sexual violence. Like there weren't any conversations in my family about it in depth enough for us to know like where do you go when something like this happens.
Yeah, and I think like it's really cool that you brought that up, because I think that it happens a lot, right, in our community, these things, but they are like a taboo conversation. And we'll touch on that a little bit more of like what is taboo in our community. But yeah, like how can we even start these conversations around resources?
I wanted to add that I had some conversations, but also for me personally, in my experiences, I noticed that I also just quite didn't know what to see as abuse off bat, if I'm being honest. Sometimes people can mask it very well and do things that will make you feel like you're not being abused, but you also just don't know what could possibly be like signs that they are abusive. So let's say you're in like a narcissistic abuse situation, like sometimes they can just gaslight you out of thinking it's abuse, and there are no real conversations about what are signs of abuse. And that's a major issue I've seen personally. I just didn't know until it was like too late that it was leading up to something more, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, definitely, I would agree with what Michelle said earlier. So with my incident, it occurred on campus. And so after it happened, it was like, well, where do I go? And it wasn't like necessarily like a resource that was like, public safety that they told you about. It wasn't anything like that. So, my friend that I told just so happened to know about the resource and told me about it. And we went there that day. But even then, with just that resource, I still feel like there was no like aftercare or anything. It was just like, okay, this is the crisis center where you report it. but like what happens after. So yeah, I definitely agree with that there's, you know, not a really big focus on resources for
Yeah. And I
sexual
think
violence.
being Black is such an like integral part to like what resources we have, right? I was assaulted as a child, and when I pressed charges against the person who assaulted me, I remember being in court and the judge saying, me asking if this person can be put as a sex offender, listed as a sex offender. And the judge said, well, even though we find this person guilty for what they did to you, and we're going to put them on probation and make it required for them to go to therapy services, which I believe in restorative justice. So this was something that aligned with kind of what I believe in. Um, they made a comment and said, but we can't put him as a sex offender because he hasn't harmed any kids. And it really threw me off because it really made me realize that I was being perceived not as a child because I was Black. And you know, like the adultification of Black girls is so common, where it's like, even though this thing happened to me as a child, I was being perceived even in that moment as the adult that I was today, and not this child that needed help.
I also wanted to kind of expand on that within resources. Like, even if you are to go to a certain space that specifically is catered to helping survivors, it's difficult because they don't really look at you like you're human when you are Black. So it's like there's also these ideas that we're able to handle much more trauma than like other races. So for us, we're already just kind of fast tracked into adulthood, and we're not really, I don't know, I think it's hard to find empathy within these resources.
Yes,
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Like the empathy is just not there in comparison to like some other cases they might treat. Like I've when you go into their spaces, they very much preach a lot about empathy, but they kind of like try to rush you through it in all honesty sometimes. Like if you, let's say, needed to get a kid, like they will rush through it and it is so uncomfortable and just it makes me not really want to keep going through it honestly, and like leave as fast as possible from how they treat you as soon as you enter.
Yeah. And I think that what do you say to the white folks who run these organizations, right? Because that's usually who are in charge of organizations like this, more specifically white women, right? And what do you say to white women who lack this empathy? Like empathy, what do you think is the source of that for them?
I think for white women, it's like their whiteness is already attached to fragility and like needing protection. So I don't think, I've totally forgot where I was going with that. Like I don't think um they're damn, I really forgot. I had a whole thought and then it just poof away. But come back to me.
Okay.
Bring it back.
I definitely feel that also just what they feel like we like to play the race card a lot. So then they feel as if, you know, oh, you're just pulling the race card, and then that they just kind of, the word I'm looking for, kind of dehumanize us in a way and feel like we don't have emotions or feelings. And that also, I feel like the way that they feel makes us puts pressure on us even more to make us feel like we have to be stronger and make us feel like we can't, you know. I don't know, it is difficult because I have a white therapist, and as much as she tries, I just know that she'll never really understand. And even as much as she tries with her empathy, it's just, even I still sometimes wonder if it is empathy, if that makes sense. Just because she can't really understand. So yeah, I just feel like that their whole outlook in just the way that society, you know, the way that society puts us in a box and just our feelings. I feel like, I don't know, just don't know if that outlook will ever change for them. I'm hoping so, but I just feel like we just need more Black, or people of color in that field, in crisis and things like that, so they can understand. And we, instead of us feeling like we're just telling our story to try to get them to understand, actually talking to someone who can, relate and stuff like that. So
Yeah, white people and women, and actually white women specifically, tend to always pull that. If you show any form of, like, I guess, emotion, I guess emotion is a like wide range of that you could say, but if you say that, they instantly hit that calm down on you. Like, they'll be like, calm down, like you're doing a lot. So I feel like in certain cases where we might be dramatic, they just instantly think we're about to get like rowdy, or like just do too, or in their words, like, the Karen videos where they're all like telling you to calm down when you can be simply talking to them as calm as possible. And I feel like that just plays a big part of it too, because they just feel like they dehumanize us to the point where we shouldn't have emotions. So it's sort of like, if I am coming to them for help with something, it's like, are you really thinking about my emotions? Or are you thinking that it might not be that bad? Or are you thinking that it was like, they most of the time just think it wasn't probably that bad because apparently I'm the dramatic one, So most of the time when I am talking to white women, I am in white spaces. Most of the time I try to keep myself more quiet. And like, these spaces being ran by mostly white people makes me want to keep myself more quiet, or like decrease my situation, even if I do want to report it. And it just gets really frustrating because I don't like overtly want to come off as, I guess, what they would call aggressive, because I want them to take me serious and give me that help. But also I know they're going to think I'm being aggressive when really I'm just being emotional.
Yeah. And I think that I really am thinking about what Caitlin said, and how like white saviorship plays a lot in the role of empathy for white people, where like I'm empathetic for this person of color, and more specifically Black people, to the point that I feel like I need to save them. And that's where I get kind of stumped at when I in moments of crises and I need help, and the people who are helping me are white. And it's like, how much of this is going to benefit me and how much of it is going to actually benefit them more? Like, where I'm being saved and not really being given the resources I need to kind of save myself or protect myself or become better myself. And that's where I get stumped at when I think of that. Hey, we can move on to the next question. This is a really important question to me. And I'm really excited to hear what you all think, but it's, why should Black voices be centered in the movement work to end gender-based violence? And that's sexual violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Why should Black women, we're talking about like, white women leading these institutions, but why should it be centered for Black voices to kind of be centered in this movement work?
When I hear that question, the first thing I thought about was just the fact of how, so Black women in general having to quote unquote take care of the Black man, or being there for the Black man. So if they're having an instance of sexual violence or domestic violence, they're probably more receptive to, not saying anything, because they want to protect that Black man, because they don't want to see them arrested, or things of that nature. I can just remember an instance I was talking to one of my friends about the baby and Danny Lay's situation, and about them going on live and everything. And for me, it was I was like, well, he shouldn't have done that, blah blah blah. But he brought up the point of, well, maybe he went on live because he felt like as a Black man he had to record and have proof, because if he didn't have that proof, the police probably wouldn't have believed him and things of that nature. So my friend kind of bringing up that point, it made me kind of realize, like, you're right. You know, they still in a way have to, Black men have to, you know, kind of protect themselves and even do this, and not being, you know, people not believing them, and even have to go to extremes like that. So I just feel like Black voices should be the center, just because also it happens a lot in our household, majority of, you know, Black households, right? And they always tell us what stays in the house, you know, whatever happens in this house stays in this house. And so it's like, all of us are going through these things, but it's like we don't know that other people are going through as well. And I feel like with other people telling their story and things of that nature might help break that, you know, break that silence of other, like, of Black people, of people, of Black people and people of color speaking out and things of that nature.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like with how much we are told to keep to ourselves and not to bring things outside of our home, having more Black people that speak up and seeing that become a thing would just encourage more people to realize, like, even though we're being told this by like whatever figure that is our authority at the time, we have a choice no matter what, and we will be protected in some way if we do come out about these things. And just knowing that it is, I guess it shouldn't be normal, but it is something that someone like would normally go through, and that you also just aren't alone in it. Because even in my own personal case, honestly, I felt very alone in it. I felt like it was like something I shouldn't have gone through, especially from seeing like my family's reactions and the people around reactions. And I needed to see more people that might have went through it, or have more support from people that went through it that look like me. Because honestly, like, also I just feel like white tears just get heard more.
Mhm.
And I'm very tired of white tears. I'm very tired of like them trying to like make themselves kind of the face of a movement. And it gets really frustrating because like you aren't the only one that is going through this. You aren't the only one that like people need to see going through it, you know? You need to bring other people to the front as well to just show like there's a diverse range of people going through the same thing, and we need to just be able to support each other, you know?
Yeah.
In my experience, it was actually more of a sense of shame. Like that was the main feeling that I had, because even in my family, like after the incident had happened, I was being blamed. I was like, it was more of like, why were you doing what you did? Why didn't you stand up for yourself, or why didn't you do a X, Y, or Z? So I feel like if we did kind of highlight the stories of Black people and people of color, it like Daisy has already said and Caitlin has already said, it would give us the opportunity to see that other people are going through this and dealing with this, and we're not alone. And it would also make having those conversations with family or like intimate relationships a bit easier, because you know, like, you know how to approach it, you have examples of it. So I feel like we definitely need to highlight Black voices and center Black voices in this
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah. And I think I teach people. I teach high schools sometimes. Um, and a lot of things I bring up is like the hierarchy of trauma, because people hate talking about the trauma Olympics, right? Like, oh, well, there's nobody hurting more than someone else. And that's false. That's not true. And I always bring up like the most oppressed people in this country and in arguably the world is fat Black trans women. Um, and I always say this, and I'm like, if we build a system that is supportive of fat Black trans women, fat Black differently abled or disabled trans women, if we build a system for them, then that system will like inherently benefit everyone. Like everyone will be able, like cis Black women, white women, even men will benefit off of a system like that. And so, yeah, I get so passionate thinking about this question because it really makes me think about like how much historically these movements don't center Black voices, and they're not working, right? Like the movement to end sexual violence, that like it's still happening. It's been happening for years. Like there's still a movement. And I like to think that sometimes it's because Black voices aren't centered, that there isn't no representation in the Black community to speak up and to say something. And that's what y'all are touching on right now, is just like, I don't even, you, and I think Michelle brought this up, but we don't even know what the resources are because no one's talking about it. And we don't see people that look like us talking about the resources. So how can we even, like, how can I even trust RCC to be a safe space if I don't see Caitlin going to RCC and saying, coming back to my community and saying, hey, RCC really did that for me, right? Like they really did help me. It's hard to build trust with organizations like this um, when we don't see people who look like us running them, getting services from them, speaking up and advocating for them. It's really hard to trust them, right? And what do y'all think? What do y'all think? What do y'all think that these institutions, like organizations like RCC, what do you think they need to do in order to build that trust with us? What do you think need to happen?
Oh, I was muted. I think it just circles back to exactly what you said, centering Black voices. Like that's how we move forward. Because we can't really make any progress when you're leaving the people who are majorly affected by this out of it. Like if we are not included, then we don't have, we're never going to know about these resources. We're never going to have access to them when we're not actively involved in it or being included in these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also feel like also in order to have these resources more available to us, and let's say we do have these resources available to us, our community is still reluctant to using these resources. So for instance, I work for a mental health nonprofit, and even just having, mental health access, people in our community are still like, oh, well, I don't want to, it's still that stigma on it. So I definitely still feel like it's still working within our community to letting them know that they do have a safe space and letting them know that they're not alone and letting them know that they do have this place, breaking down that stigma that's on these things. Because like I said, a lot of people, even with mental health, still think, oh, well, I don't want to go talk to no white person about my problems, because in that profession, it is majority white people. So it's, them not feeling the security and not feeling safe, because of us not having that representation. So I just feel like also with starting within the community of letting them know, making it a little bit more I don't know. I'm not sure how we'll do that, but I feel like it's starting within the community somehow to letting them know that they have those spaces.
Yeah, I wanted to also add on that because I feel like in my personal experience, when I did have to go out and seek help and look for these resources, they were not in my community. They weren't in my area. So it's not like I can go across the street and get help or like go to a community center and talk to whoever I need to talk to. I have to physically make that travel. And a lot of people don't have access to that. So I think moving some of these facilities into our neighborhoods would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, I come from a lesser, like, privileged neighborhood in general, and we don't have resources, or if we did have any resources near, they don't really publicize them or really like tell you how to get to those. And then also another thing I've noticed, like, most of the time, I feel like with these resources, also just like entering into the spaces and explaining these things, like visiting like schools, even like high schools, even middle schools, just like going in and verbally letting them ask questions and like letting people learn, because one thing I've always noticed, especially as someone who does a lot of community engagement and community events, I am not comfortable, or people don't get comfortable until they know more details, and they want to know specific details sometimes. And just going into these spaces and being able to ask them questions and having conversations and seeing like being able to just really hear about it and understand truly what's happening, because a lot of the misconception comes from not truly understanding that there is more than just one way. And just having talks really is what I think would really help a lot, just making it an open conversation and not just some type of stigmatized, like some type of stigma conversation, honestly, something that people just kind of avoid talking about until it happens. Like, no, we need to have the conversations before it happens, and like let people know answers before it gets like becomes a little bit later. Like what I said earlier with me not knowing signs of something becoming abusive or something being abused, like it's because I didn't have any conversations, or and I didn't talk about it at all, and I just didn't feel comfortable finding a space that would allow me to talk about it. So yeah, I just think conversations are really important.
Yeah.
I think having the conversations, going back to what you're saying, Daisy, and also having the conversations at a younger age, because a lot of, and especially in our family, they feel like, oh, you're too young, stay out of grown folk business and things like that. And it's like, well, even now more than ever, things that are happening, it's getting, it's hitting our younger generation, at a younger age. And it's like, it's sad to say, like, so for instance, with my job, we like to only target middle and high schools, but people in elementary school also go through, these things. So if we can, take the preventative steps and things like that, even though it is a sensitive topic, and, still just somehow tweaking it to where they can understand, not necessarily, giving them all of that, but just to where they can understand and letting them know, hey, if this happens, you can come to me and things like that. So
Yeah, I was doing a presentation yesterday, and one of the Black women asked me, how do you know that a relationship is abusive before it gets there? And it was a shocking question to me, because this is an adult who is struggling to see the signs before it becomes this huge situation that they're in danger of getting out of. And we know that most murders from domestic violence happens when a woman is leaving, when the person is leaving. And so when you're entangled in this abusive relationship, especially if it's physically abusive, but emotionally abusive, digitally abusive, like all of this, you're entangled in this abusive relationship, and it becomes a danger to leave it. It becomes even more dangerous to leave. And so one of the things that is really important that y'all are touching on is to notice the small things before it becomes super dangerous, and to notice the red flags immediately. And I think like the kid teaching children is so important. I was doing a research study on the adultification of Black girls, and one of the statistics I saw was that 60% of Black women reported that they were coerced into having sex before the age of 18. And we know that coercion, that's sexual assault. And so 60% of Black women have reported that they've been sexually assaulted before the age of 18. And that statistic was so alarming to me. But it was even more alarming to know that like these Black women aren't finding a safe space to articulate that this is happening to them, that they're not able to articulate that like they have been assaulted, and like what these spaces even look like for them, like what these especially if they're not even in our neighborhood. And so yeah, y'all are really touching, y'all are really hitting it. And it's bringing me to my next question, which is like the taboo of sexual assault and domestic violence and intimate partner violence and mental health in the Black community. Like there's a taboo around that. And I'm interested to know that if you got help, or maybe if you didn't, how did you navigate that taboo so that you were able to kind of help with your process of healing in whatever way that looks?
honestly did not end up getting help, mostly because of both fear and I didn't know that I could. I thought my situation was not abuse until like months later when I finally like really realized like that wasn't right. Like it wasn't right at all. And without getting help, honestly, I went into a really bad spiral. But what pulled me out was finally realizing that it was abuse and finally actually going to therapy. Um, and for me, a large help was also just I have people in my family that just know more resources to help me find like a Black therapist specifically. And just, I guess, having people that when I finally came to the realization and finally did speak for myself, having people around me that were able to tell me what I could do now that I realized it. Because honestly, you don't really know what to do, especially if you have a moment where you realize it later. You just are in confusion because you're like, well, I didn't notice it when it was happening, so I can't do anything now. But knowing you can still do something, at least for yourself, is something, you know?
Mhm, mhm.
I don't mind going next. And I can share a little bit about my story. So just it being on campus and, you know, I guess also me telling my best friend and me being in a relationship at the same time, the person I was in a relationship with didn't believe me. My best friend at the time didn't believe me. So it was kind of like, where do I go from here? And also being in shock, and also because of the stigma that's brought upon violence is like, well, you didn't like sexual violence, you didn't say anything, or you didn't scream, you didn't say no. Well, in that instance, people are shocked, people handle situations differently. So just changing that. But where was I going with that? So sorry. But as far as like the healing process, I feel like, or so also after that, what happened, I began to um become very sexually promiscuous, um and engaging in those activities, because for me it didn't hit me that I was sexually traumatized until probably a year later. I didn't, process it until a year later. And so then I became very depressed and things of that nature. So for me, my healing process at that time was drinking, was just relying on that. I was in school, so I was worrying about school, working, and that. But over time, I did get more into meditation and realizing that it wasn't my fault, and realizing that, it did happen. And I did feel like if I did have had that talk and didn't have that taboo within, my family, which was, well, you can come to me, okay, I can come to you, but what's going to happen after that? You're going to go run your mouth to the rest of the family. Like, are you going to actually give me help? So it was kind of, so like, um, but for me, it was just really, it made me turn into myself and just look at myself and just love myself more, um, for, going through that, and then just becoming a better person out of that situation, and learning things about myself, that I didn't know before, and like things that I would love. So that really was just a part. And also seeking therapy, which also doing those things helped me um, get a degree in psychology, because before I wasn't really interested in those things, but because of these different events and things that happened in my college career, definitely, it wouldn't, if, and I don't all regret situations. I definitely look at them because they happen to better me, to make me a better person. And I can look on that and help somebody else in the future. But I definitely feel like, if those things didn't happen, I wouldn't, be who I am or where I am today. So,
Yeah.
I think I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but in my experience, it was difficult for me because I did not receive help, even going to therapy. my therapist, it was like free therapy, so I would see them like once every 3 months, and like that wasn't doing much of anything. So when I had that kind of introduction to therapy, I didn't really take it seriously, and I didn't think it would be very helpful, considering it wasn't like the way that I was introduced to it, it wasn't helpful. And I couldn't really speak to anyone in my family about it because it was so taboo. I didn't know that I was in danger and in an abusive relationship until there was a gun to my head. So I really wasn't I wasn't aware of the situation until reality snapped back for me, because I also um have BPD. So in that, there was a lot going on within that relationship, and I didn't really know, um, I didn't really know where to go for help, or even if anything was wrong. Like I thought it was fine. And once I did leave the relationship, a lot of the backlash that I got from it was, well, why were you even talking to this person? Why did you do what you did? So it wasn't like I could come to people for support, or at least with my family. I didn't really have that. Like, yes, they cared to an extent, and they, like, wanted me to be safe, but at the same time, they didn't really understand. So they didn't know how to react either. They were responding from the first emotion that they felt, which was anger or like disappointment. So they didn't really know how to handle it either. And for me, honestly, it was a lot of struggling by myself until I figured it out. Like I was alone through the majority of it, and like I also leaned heavily on partying, drinking, or whatever I could to distract myself from what was going on around me, because it was easier to do that than to even try and talk about it with somebody, in my opinion. And until recently, I was able to get into therapy that was actually helping me, and one where I was able to see my therapist more than just once every 3 weeks. So I think it's really dangerous, honestly, that we all kind of had like a similar answer of not really knowing how to navigate this, like not really knowing where to go. And I think I think that's a little bit of a common ground for most Black people who experience either intimate partner violence or mental health. Like you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do. So in the beginning of that, you're just coping in any way that you can, and usually it's something negative or whatever you can get your hands on.
Yeah. So would y'all say that because these spaces lack Black representation, it leads to Black communities not wanting to reach out, and instead they choose other ways to cope, like substance abuse? Yeah, yeah, because
Absolutely.
that's what I'm hearing, is just like,
Yes.
yeah. And I think that it's really frustrating to know that, like, when we go through these processes, especially being Black and a woman, or Black and queer, you go through this trauma that happens to you, and the process to heal is not built in with this white movement of like positivity, right? It's not built in with this white movement of like, you have a community of people with you who are standing with you, who are here for you, because you have this trauma that happened to you, and you're looking at the institutions and you're like, I'm not represented there. You're looking at your family, and your family have this taboo, and you feel alone. And for me, the only space of safety I feel is with other survivors that look like me and experience the same experiences as me. But no one's speaking up because of lack of resources.
It always circles back to the lack of resources. Like that's.
And even for me, like, even getting the resources, it wasn't resources for that, it was, I'm going to therapy, like, so I went to school, tried to go to the school counseling, and those were like interns, so I'm like seeing a different person. And then they referred me to like the Department of Mental Health. And then I had a person, but then like they had to go. So it was just constantly, seeing someone, because we didn't have access to resources such as like insurance, like that. So it's like, okay, I don't have insurance, so I have to go to something that's on the sliding scale, you know, which is fine because I've been seeing my therapist that place for the past 5 years now, and I love her and she's helped me, but it's just the lack of resources and the lack of representation in those resources, because I feel like I would have healed a lot quicker if I would have had that. But now I'm just now getting to my healing when that happened in like 2014, you know? So it's like, yeah.
Yeah. And playing off of that, I'm thinking of what Michelle said about how these places aren't in our neighborhoods. And so, like you're talking about insurance and like how insurance is not easily available to low income Black communities, and how transportation is not easily available to low income Black communities, and even like Black students, right? And so like thinking about access is not just being like, oh, there's no representation, these institutions are ran by white women and white people, but also thinking like physically, how do I get there? And financially, how do I get there? Like the healing process is not just community, but it's also about having money, and it's also about having transportation and things like that, having housing and all of these like livable things that you need that have to come first. Like you have to think about your house, or for me, I have to think about my rent before I even think about seeing a therapist, because a therapist isn't going to come first to where I need to live, and that's such a priority to so many Black people.
Always like having to choose, always having to choose one or the other. I was walking to my therapist appointments for 2 years straight, literally walking like a mile or two, or riding the bus and then walking a mile, like, then, you know, so I definitely agree with all of that.
Yeah, after a few months of therapy, I just canceled it so I could save money. It was the first thing I thought to go, which is probably not great, but it was the most expensive thing that I could get really fast.
Okay, so I have one more question, and then we can go into seeing if anybody have any questions in the chat. But my last question is, do you consider decentering Black voices and stories as a form of oppression?
Yes. I don't know how to explain why, but yes. Like I feel like we have been silent. Black people haven't had a voice for so long, and then to be removed, or not even to even not be even be considered in these movements, is an issue in itself. But like I don't know. I just feel like decentering Black voices is a problem. Like why like why even do that? I don't know. It's just not it.
I think even like, is it even, sometimes it's not even intentional, or maybe it is intentional. I'm not white, so I wouldn't know. But like, you know, there's like so many, and I wouldn't even say that Black people don't have voices, more so like Black people aren't heard, because I think they do have voices and I think they do say something, but their voices are decentered in movement work, especially movement work to end sexual violence. And so we see so many, and I guess it's back to the representation, like that circle that we keep going back to, a representation and lack of resources. But Black voices are decentered from movement work, and it makes that lack of representation happen, and it makes our stories not be heard, and that plays back into our community where Black women aren't getting help because they think that it's just them, when it's really so many people also like them. And so, yeah.
Can we go into the fact, I don't know why, but when you said that, that just brought up the fact of even of how Black women are looked at as being hypersexual and how we're just sexualized in general, you know? So that, I feel like that just also leads to us people not believing us, and us not even wanting to, you know, say anything. Oh, well, you know, people saying, oh, she a hoe anyway, or all this other type of stuff. And it's like someone left in the comment, hypersexuality is a common symptom of, sexual violence. So it's like, you're talking about this girl and it's like, she could have been, sexually violated, a while ago. And maybe that's, when it's really just something that she doesn't even realize that's happening. So yeah, it's, yeah.
And hypersexualization is like such a common symptom for so many mental disorders too. Like I have bipolar disorder, and one of the things that tipped, and this might be too much information, but you know what, safe space. One of the things that tipped my psychiatrist off was you're hypersexual. And hypersexualization was always blamed on my PTSD and me responding to sexual trauma, which I'm sure is a big part of it. But another part of it was also that I had a mental disorder too. And so I agree, like black women are allowed to be sexually liberated. They're not allowed to and when you're hypersexual, that may be a symptom of a mental disorder. It may be something that happened because of trauma, and they are allowed to be that without being ridiculed. Instead of saying maybe this person needs resources and help, instead they're being called a whore or a hoe or things like that. And yeah, I'm really happy that you brought that up, Caitlin, because that's such an integral part to specifically the Black woman experience and the Black queer experience. Daisy, do you have something? Okay.
I was gonna speak to that and just say, like, in general, I just feel like when it comes to being a Black woman and being like just sexual in general, like I most of the time feel uncomfortable with being perceived as sexy, because I just feel like once you get perceived as sexy once, you're always sexy. And they don't like take it away. And then also that sexy turns into, oh, you're just like being like, especially in the community, for me, I grew up being especially thicker. I was always told I was being fast when I would just put on a dress. Like, I feel like it's always a hypersexualization around Black women, and it's just it doesn't even matter if you're a kid, like, and it's ridiculous. And sorry, I just got like a little riled up, but yeah.
Yeah, so we have a question in the chat, and the question is, let me scroll up. What would you like, what would you like for support from elders in the Black community? What should we be more mindful of? So what should elders do for us?
The comment of being fast, that one always gets me. I had to change anytime I had company over. I could put on something like, I had a bigger chest, and sometimes, I might have wanted to have a little cleavage out, but no, I was being fast. Like, just that constantly telling me and policing what I have on and what I look like, that was ridiculous. Like, it's just gotta stop. It makes you have body image issues later, everything. It's terrible. And it was mostly from old people. It was never really from anyone younger.
I definitely agree. Go ahead.
Growing up, I just feel like growing up, that like those comments are made, and you just basically said everything, but I'm like, yes, behind everything you just said. Because if y'all really want to know, if elders really want to know what to do, y'all need to listen. That is where we start. Because first of all, y'all think, because I'm sorry, I love elders, I'm not trying to come for y'all, but it's like, y'all think because you are elders, yes, you have more experience in life and everything, but it is important to listen to, the youth that may be coming to you, because we're not like trying to come to you and like tell you what the world is and what it is, but like sometimes that what you may have learned could be trauma that was passed down from like older people or older generations of yours. So it's like, you really have to listen to what we're saying. And so many times I've been told to change because a man is in the house or something, or someone came over, and it's like, y'all have to unlearn, like we all have to do a lot of unlearning, but especially elders have to unlearn the constant I can't even talk. criticization of of Black children and their bodies and when they're growing up too. It's just like, it's you already have to deal with so much when your body's changing and going through puberty. And it's like, I don't need you in my ear telling me I'm fast, telling me all this other stuff. Like, just listen to me, be there for me, and support me.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
I also feel like understanding that the world isn't the same, understanding that it's constantly evolving and changing, and that, you know, they are going to have to adapt to new things just as we are, even within the past couple of years. So, you know, I just feel like things especially, I don't know, things aren't the same. So I just feel like they just, even regardless if they agree to it or not, like for example, my dad wasn't, so one of my cousins is a trans man, and his whole life, you know, he grew up calling him, you know, niece, my niece, you know, things like that. And they got into it, and I just had to let my dad know, you know, like, things are not the same, you know, and he is still the same person, you know, regardless. Like, so you need to treat him as such, like, not, you know, you're gonna have, regardless if you like it or not, you're gonna have to adapt to the new ways of the world and just to the way, you know. So it's just like, I don't know, whether you like it or not, we still have to adapt. Like,
yeah, and especially with trans identities, like trans people have always existed. There's just feeling safer, hopefully, to be open about their trans identity. And that's something that elders just aren't used to, people feeling safe to be themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have a question. What can non-Black POC, so non-Black people of color, and white advocates do to better support Black survivors?
Can I be honest? That question kind of annoys me because I feel like we have this entire conversation and it's like, it's kind of frustrating. I have to sit down and re-explain like how you can be there for me when I just said it. Like, I appreciate you coming and asking that question, but it's like, we're speaking, we're telling you right now what we need, the support and like being in our communities and facilitating these things. Not necessarily you, but you know, like if you could donate to it or just support in any way. But like, yeah, I feel like also maybe just listening. I say that a lot, but it's actually really crucial because a lot of people don't know how to actively listen and listen for the point of like to let that person be heard versus just listening so that you can respond. So just listen.
Yeah. And I think representation, hiring Black people, like, I'm a multicultural advocate and outreach specialist. And I just believe, like Caitlin touched on, like she has a white therapist and she knows that her white therapist can never fully relate to her experience as a Black queer woman. And I feel strongly about that. Like, I feel strongly that sometimes the thing that you can do is just hire more Black folks to be the representation and to be more relatable. Because there is a limit to what you can do as a non-Black person.
And there is a limit to the amount of explaining Black people want to do.
It's true. Yeah. Okay, so we are at time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for listening to us. And hopefully you've learned something to better support Black survivors, and listen and be a better resource to Black survivors. I want you all to just, for folks that came in late, to re-say your name, your pronouns, and your profession. So everybody's reminded of who these beautiful people are that was on the panel. And then we can call it a night. So Michelle,
I'll go first since I'm unmuted. My name is Michelle. Any pronoun is fine for me, and I am a digital artist.
My name is Caitlin. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a regional program coordinator for NAMI, South Carolina. Daisy.
Daisy.
So sorry. My name is Daisy, she, they, and I'm an artist.
All right. So yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thank you for listening. And Gray, when you get the chance, you can turn off the live. Okay. Yeah. Thank y'all again. Daisy and Michelle, get W-9s in for me. So y'all can get paid. I want y'all to be paid for this. We don't believe in free Black labor. So make sure y'all get y'all W-9s in for me. And then Caitlin, I'll turn yours in. All right.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all. Thank you.
Bye. Good night.